Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. And it's been our pleasure in the past to have so many wonderful guests who have shared their stories. And as I say each week, this week we've got another really exceptional guest. And our guest this week is Andrea Attipoe. I knew I was going to say it wrong. I've been practicing it.
Attipoe.
Attipoe.
The final E.
Each week I try, but each week I fail. But right, Andrea, I really want to say a big thank you. He's a bioengineering PhD student. His work is really fascinating, and he's also recently become the chair of Imperial College's Black Doctoral Student Network. So, Andrea, I want to say a really big thank you for agreeing to be our guest this week. And you know what? I'm going to just go with the flow with this one because I know we've had the discussion, and I'm going to start with the idea of where it is that you got your original sense of identity, sense of belonging as you were growing up.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. There've been so many great guests before me that I almost feel inadequate being here, although we're part of a big community. But I think to answer your question, my sense of belonging is something that has been ever evolving. It's not necessarily something that I was born with. It's not something that I consider to be complete as of today. But it's a work in progress. And that work has been done over many personal experiences, environments I've been in. And and I guess I would have to give a full history to answer a question that I don't really have the answer for myself. But to sort of give you the beginning of it all, of this reflection, and I need to maybe give a little bit of context. I'm half Togolese from Togo, it's west coast of Africa, and my mom is Italian. And I was born and raised in Belgium, and I spent pretty much 21 years of my life in Belgium, where I did all of my school and my undergrad and part of my master's. And so it's been a very long time basically navigating what was a very white environment. And it sounds negative when I put it like this, but I'm very happy about my upbringing, and I've made a lot of friends, experiences, and acquired a lot of identity and personal influence from my time in Belgium. Mm-hmm. But I guess Belgium was maybe the first time where I started understanding more about who I am in terms of where I belong and where I see myself. Basically, as I mentioned, it was a very white environment. And so by almost assimilation, I was brought up in Belgian culture, in different aspects of my identity that weren't necessarily tied to my Blackness and to my Togolese heritage. Mm-hmm. And I think that went on until my teenage years. And eventually that changed, or I should say, change was forced upon me, mm-hmm. because I realized how I was perceived. Things that were a little bit innocuous in the beginning became more serious and made me understand that I was not white, I was not Belgian, even though I was half white, even though I was born and raised in Belgium. I got reminded of aspects of my identity pretty quickly.
Can you expand upon that? Because up until now, you're saying, well, actually, you embrace the Belgian culture. You saw yourself as Belgian. You didn't see yourself as being Black. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what was it that kind of like sparked or triggered, or was that pivotal point which happened to you, which changed that perception of yourself?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I didn't see myself as being Black. I definitely did. Okay. I had an influence from my family. In many aspects, I was brought up in many reflections of Black culture.
Right.
But I didn't believe that my being Black was important in my first interaction I didn't necessarily think that that's what people saw in me. I thought that they saw me as one of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And maybe the first instance of me realizing that that wasn't the case must have happened during school with some racist episodes and incidents where people have said things, but it didn't go as far as further than that. It was pretty much, you know, children being children, probably repeating what their parents were saying. I didn't take it as a symptom of something problematic at the time. Until I guess the first time where really things took a turn for me was being a teenager and having more and more adult features. My interaction with the police is what really determined, I would say, my future in many ways, but mostly my understanding of myself, because I was not seen as a, you know, young teenager that was doing high school, getting ready to get into engineering school. I wasn't seen as Belgian. I wasn't seen as Italian. I was seen as Black, and that was it.
How did that make you? How did that make you feel, that realization? And what was it that led to that realization, that the first thing that they're seeing isn't a young, intelligent young man, isn't a Belgian, it's someone who's just Black? How was that for you?
I think that it first appeared in very innocent ways. You know, I would get controlled by the police, and I just assumed that these were random things. You know, I didn't necessarily think that there was something that was tied to me specifically. And that went on, but until one night, 14th of May, 2013, I'll never forget it, where I was arrested by the police. And they basically, in the time during their interaction with me, assaulted me. So one of the police officers hit me in the face with a metal object, and then spray painted my face. And that was an extremely traumatic experience. I couldn't necessarily understand why that was happening and how I could get out of this, because as far as their looks had been different on me, I was under the understanding that the police was there to sort of protect me.
Yeah.
And there's this eternal question, who do you call when the ones that are supposed to protect you aren't doing that job, right?
Yeah.
And so it was just extreme fear for hours, where I received threats. I was told that if I kept asking why this was happening to me, this officer would pull his Glock and put it on my temple.
His Glock, is that the gun?
Yeah, the gun, yes.
Right.
I believe he called it a 9mm. He said, I'm going to put my 9mm on your forehead. So I was 17 at the time, and that was something that I'd never left me. I still see the firearm, you know, in the holster, hand gesture away after having just received that threat. And so after that, I was taken into custody, because I guess they had to figure out what to do after this had happened. Mm-hmm. And I was detained in a cell for 5 hours, which, without my parents being informed, which under Belgian law is illegal, because a minor cannot be detained in a cell without notice to the parents. And I wish I could express what it feels like to be in a cell for 5 hours with your own thoughts, alone, having to ask every time you have to go to the bathroom or do or say anything, hearing the screams from the cells next to you.
Yeah.
All of these things are just deeply embedded in my memory. I don't think I'll ever shake them off. I don't wish it upon anyone. And it was even harder to comprehend that this was happening to me as, you know, student in high school, about to go to university. A lot of it, I felt like I was being treated like, you know, this wanted criminal that had done some horrible crime, and I just couldn't really compute.
I don't want to interrupt your story, but up until that point, I'm thinking, did you feel that you were almost like privileged? Did you feel that you had not an expectation, but there was an expectation that, you know, I will be treated in a certain way, and all of a sudden this seemed to just come crashing down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm extremely privileged in many ways. And, you know, my parents have always very much cared for me. Both of them were present, have always supported me in my studies, have always provided me everything I needed. And that moment in time was a moment where I understood that I wasn't treated like the other kids in my school, basically. So there was a disconnect between who I was, what I was doing, and the way in which I was treated. And so far, bear in mind, nothing racist was said, nothing explicit had been said to me. And so I couldn't even put it on the count of racism because it wasn't clear in my mind yet. You know, I was 17, as I mentioned. It wasn't, I couldn't really, as I said, I couldn't really compute. And then the police decided to bring me home, and that's when things started falling into place. Because
explain how it started to fall into place.
Yeah. So when they asked me where to bring me in order to bring me home, I gave them my address, and they said, "No, seriously, your real address." And that sounded weird to me because I thought, why would I lie about this? But anyways, and I just told them this is really where I live. And so they give each other some weird looks and then started driving. And then they got to my home and, you know, rang the doorbell, and my parents opened the door. And instantly they want to come into the living room and sort of talk to us, which is a bit strange because you wouldn't, as part of, you know, your...
They didn't even call you. They didn't call your parents to come to the station to pick you up, but now they want to sit in the living room and have a conversation.
Exactly. And the conversation they wanted to have was to basically search our house and my room for whatever they could find for some reason. I believe that they were trying to cover tracks at this point. I think that they had to sort of, put it on something, because bear in mind, I'm walking through the door with my cheek open, big bruise and blood and blue spray paint on my face, right? This is the state that they brought me, my parents. And so when my dad saw this, he asked him what happened to him. I mean, you arrested him, something happened, you can talk to me about that later. First, tell me why he's looking like this.
Yeah. And
so they started, you know, kind of saying something that I didn't even hear. You know, you have to imagine the high intensity of that, that moment. And I told my dad, they hit me and they sprayed paint in my face.
Yeah.
And so that was a moment in time where I understood that my dad understood what I had gone through. Because he instantly stopped listening to anything they were saying. And he said, "Why did you do that?" And they were saying, "Yeah, we have to search the room, we have to this." He was saying, I'm about to kick you out of my home if you cannot explain why my son looks like this. And so eventually, I mean, they did what they had to do. And me and my dad went to the police station, and we wanted to file in a complaint. And when we got to the reception's desk, this woman basically looked at us and said, "Oh, it's you. Yeah, they're waiting for you." Which is also, again, not very standard in terms of procedures, because if I want to file in a complaint against an officer, you give me the form, I fill in the form, I go home. Nobody's waiting for me to have a conversation, right?
Yeah.
But they did, and there was two of them. One of the police officers that was there during my detention, not the one that hit me, that's kind of an important detail, and then the chief of that police station. And they basically started talking to my dad and saying that, you know, nothing irregular happened, your son is lying to you, trying to gaslight him, I guess, into not believing me. And I was telling my dad, it's true, this really happened. I mean, look at my face, how else? And the police officer that was there had seen the violence, had seen everything happen. And I had basically tried to calm his colleague down. Then looks at me and says, "Oh, why are you lying?" And kind of does a face, you know, shruggish and trying to say, "Come on, cut it out now, stop it."
Yeah.
And I think in my head, it computed that they wouldn't give each other up. They would protect each other to death if they need to, because that's what police does. They just cover each other's tracks. And then cues this very bizarre conversation where this high-ranked police officer is saying, "You know, when we arrested your son, we didn't imagine that we'd have to deal with people like you. You know, you live in this area of the city. When we drove into the driveway, you have a nice house, you have a nice car. That is not what we were expecting." And that's when I got my answer. They treated me based on what I looked like.
Yeah.
You know, I was a black kid in a tracksuit.
Yeah.
They didn't treat me like who they thought I was or where they thought I came from. And that felt so wrong to me. And there was something disgusting about it. First off, because I have a lot of friends that don't come from privileged environments, and that would look exactly like me.
Mm-hmm.
Do they deserve the treatment that I got?
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, what does a person that live in my area, what kind of rights do they get additionally to anybody else? And so even if it wasn't a race thing, even just the call it a postcode thing, why should I get a privileged treatment? And why is that the standard you default to when you see someone like me? And these were all questions that started brewing in my mind. And I've never left me. And we tried to sue, we tried to get some justice, but the police basically denied and claimed that I had hit myself and sprayed myself in the face with a spray can in the back of the police van with my hands cuffed behind my back. So none of it really made any sense. But it started something in me. It definitely did.
In this notion of belonging, how did that, because up until that moment in time, you did say that you'd had interaction with your father's side of the family and your mother's side of the family, but inherently you felt Belgium. You were a Belgian young man. You still are a Belgian young man, but now your eyes have been almost like opened. Would you say that was the sensation that you had? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what sensation did you have at that moment in time, and how has that impacted you?
If I have to answer that question, I have to deflect in a strange way where I don't feel like I'm anything in terms of nationalities.
Right, okay.
Tied to a country. I'm tied to cultures. A lot of my culture is Belgian. A lot of my culture is Togolese, a lot of it is Italian, and a lot of it is becoming British after 4 years and a half living here. So in terms of belonging, it's this, when you're mixed race, there's this weird feeling that you don't really belong anywhere. In Italy, I'm also seen as black. In Belgium, I'm seen as black. In the UK, I'm seen as black. In Togo, I'm seen as white. And that's I think is the things they don't give you the manual about being mixed race, you know? There's no warning at birth. You don't get the pre-lecture. And I had to figure that out. I had to go to Togo. I had to spend some time there. And then kids in the street would start calling me Yovo, which means whitey. And taken aback, because my whole life I had thought that, you know, this perception of me is black. It turns out, nah, I'm nothing nowhere.
That's not, I'm not saying it's the strange, but it's that idea that it all comes down to what you look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? Absolutely, based on what you look like, that the hue of your skin has given people that notion of, oh, he's not black, or he's not white, or he's black, or he's white, based on just the way, and it's nothing to do with who you are internally. It's just a facade which they see. And so when you then kind of like have had to navigate other spaces, how has that, you say that you don't have like an overall sense of belonging, but how has that influenced the way in which you would respond in different situations? Or has it had that influence on you?
Yeah, I guess that there's this sort of paradox where I say that I don't belong anywhere. At the same time, I belong everywhere. I'm this sort of chameleon of cultures, which, you know, allows me and facilitates interactions with many of the cultures that I'm from, more than if I was a complete stranger. So you do get bits of familiarity, of intimate relationship that you wouldn't have with somebody that doesn't speak your language, for example. I do get that a lot. And so I'm not unhappy about who I am, about my identity, about my multiculturalism. So I navigate most environments just fine. I think the reality is that a lot of people, in contrast, are unhappy with who I am. And I don't really have a chip on my shoulder. I don't really tend to blame things on issues of racism. I don't victimize myself. But many experiences have taught me to also not underestimate how I'm perceived.
Mm-hmm.
These things will potentially harm you.
Mm-hmm.
People and their ideas can potentially harm you. And it's not, I don't believe it's victimization if you're just looking out for yourself and your people. I don't use this for anything. I wish I didn't have to deal with it, but I'm careful, you know. And I think coming to the UK is also a very big realization in terms of how careful you need to be, because the UK is, compared to Belgium, at least in terms of how people behave, or I should say, the bubbles I'm in the UK, in academia, and the people I'm around are very progressive, are very forward compared to how behind Belgium and its culture can be on issues of racism. But that doesn't change the fact that there are some deep issues. And I think that you notice them even more when you are in a bubble where people are attentive about these things.
Mm.
And the UK has been a very transformative experience as well in that direction.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I'm just thinking about, so you've been in the UK for 4 years now, right? So that would have been, I'm gonna separate it to the post, the before and after the May event, not your May event, but the other May event, right? Before and after George Floyd, right? What have you seen from your perspective, which have said something's happening, something has to be done?
So again, I think that for most of my time in academia in the UK, I was using that chameleon aspect of myself, where, you know, here's a new environment. Let me try and navigate it. And I've very much embraced British culture as well. There's a lot of things that I feel very familiar with, coming from Belgium, Italy, different parts of the world, where I see a lot of myself in how people are here. And I've accepted it. I've accepted that I was one of the only Black men in my department. I've accepted that the statistics in terms of population in academia aren't necessarily better overall, aside from my department. I just kind of, you know, let me navigate through this and get what I can from it. May 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, was a time where I understood, because of all the people around me, because of the outrage and the outcry, that I had something to say about it. I was done sitting idle on matters of race, is what I mean, and trying to convince people that, you know, I'm worthy, I'm good, don't judge me by the cover, judge me by my actions, by my this, by my that. I got sick of being judged by the color of my skin. There was something deeply personal about a Black man being murdered by a police officer in broad daylight, because it just threw me instantly back to what had happened to me. And again, this is not a self-absorbed way of seeing this. Many Black men have been through similar experiences with the police. And when you know, watch 7 minutes of pure horror and you imagine yourself in that place, something clicks in you. And it did for me. And I decided I had to start saying something about it. And Imperial has some work to do in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion. But Imperial is lucky to have, is blessed with a community of extremely resilient and strong Black people that are doing a lot of the core work. And I was, through Deshane Murray, which you know very well, able to join that community. And that's been probably one of the most fundamental things that has happened to me in the past 2 years, was to connect with a side of academia in the UK that I had sort of navigated alongside rather than with. And even that was not necessarily easy. I think one of the anecdotes that I tend to talk about was the first meeting I had with, and this is, bear in mind, maybe 10 days after George Floyd's murder, where there was this massive call with the African Caribbean Society, Black researchers in neuro, all sorts of people that, and from all sorts of walks of life, that have this common characteristic of being Black and being in UK academia. And I was on a call with them. And this is probably the biggest, when I first understood that my understanding of anti-racism, my feelings and my thoughts were fundamentally different to the ones that people have in the UK. Because people in the UK are tired. They're exhausted by racism. I'm not going to say I wasn't, but I definitely felt like this was the beginning of a fight for me. Whereas a lot of these people had been fighting for so long that they were just done. Quite honestly done. And so I was sat on this call, and I think I said, I think that my exact words were that we Black people have failed to explain to white people what our struggle is. And that sentence only caused such outrage on the call, where people started leaving, hanging up on the phone, saying, I don't have the mental space for this. I don't want to be having this conversation. He's advocating that we talk to white people to resolve these issues, and I'm done. And so, I mean, call ended. Again, I was distraught, a deeply, deeply traumatizing event, or realizing that even the people that I would be put in a category with do not identify with me. They don't feel the same way that I do. Perhaps because I'm mixed race, and so that half white side of me wishes for some level of conversation, reconciliation, but they just weren't having it. And I now understand how poor my phrasing was, and how I don't consider racism to be a failure of Black people, absolutely not. But I did think that we had to start speaking up. The reality is that they had been speaking up for so long that they see this half Black kid walk in the room and telling us what we're supposed to do. I totally understand how they would have felt that way. And it took some time. And Deshane basically got me on a side call and said, look, what you said is your truth. This is you. This is your identity. This is what you carry with you. But you have to understand that some people in the UK here have a different version for themselves. They don't see things the same way that you do because they've been through so much. They've tried so much. They've been at it for so long, and very little change has happened. And that was honestly one of maybe a true display of love in that phone call, because I felt like I was accepted for who I am. He wasn't saying you were wrong in saying this because this or that. He was saying, that's you, and that's okay too. But let me explain to you what these people have been through. In the past 2 years, I've been doing just that. I've been having countless conversations. I've been bridging the gap between academia and Black people in it, which a lot of times are alienated. And yeah, it's been an incredibly formative experience where I finally got to understand what it means to be part of a greater cause rather than an individual fight against racism. This was me trying to push things in the right direction for not just myself, or rather, not for myself in a selfish way, but not for myself as a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
But doing it because I believe that all of us Black people in academia deserve a place, deserve opportunities, and deserve respect.
Yeah. You know, as you were articulating your story there, or articulating that particular experience, it came to my mind about the idea of trajectories, and the fact that so oftentimes the surface appearance makes people believe that and it's when people start thinking about Black people as a monolith, as just one type of people, that you then don't actually fully appreciate and understand the different trajectories that people have gone through to get to where they are now. And so from your understanding, as Deshane said to you, right, that's your reality. But for the other people's reality, their reality is something totally different. And you mentioned about the fact that you've tried, and I know that you've done some sterling work in being that advocate, in being that conduit between, so that people can, from my understanding, you enjoy that conversation. You're happy to embrace and that bicultural competence being able to navigate two systems because you understand the systems and to help individuals get from one place to the other. How, give us an illustration of some of the work or some of the stuff which you're doing, which you believe is making a difference, or what difference would you like to see happen?
Yeah. So shortly after that call that I was talking about, Deshane had the idea to create the Black Doctoral Network, which is a group of PhD students of Black heritage. And that Black heritage can be very distant. So long as you identify as Black, you're more than welcome. And the idea of the network was to provide a space, a sense of community. We're in this together, face similar issues or not, but we're going to help each other navigate those issues. And that was the start of everything, I believe, because it put me in a room with other people to share my ideas and exchange, receive some form of feedback from people that understood that we all came from different walks of life, and we all were at least have the same objective in mind. Increase representation numbers, increase treatment of Black people in academia, promote opportunities. These were the key things that were shared amongst all of us. And that inspired me to go further and further. And I've started giving talks to my department, mostly about Blackness in academia, talking about the numbers and the treatment of Black people in academia, whether it be microaggressions or outright racism or different aspects of, erasure of Black people in science and in publications, for example. These are all things that I keep very, very dear. And along that path, I've participated in many Black History Month events. I've been invited to discuss these topics with different groups, and
How would you say? How have you seen what you're doing impact Imperial? What is there anything tangible that you've seen change within that kind of like 2 years space that you've been involved in these activities?
Yeah, so in 2020, Imperial pledged £10 million over the period of 5 years, I believe, to go towards scholarships for underrepresented groups, and with initially a focus on Black students. And I've been involved in the committee that was setting up the details of that scholarship, and then setting up the mentoring scheme that came with the scholarship, because basically the difference between positive discrimination and promotion of diversity is the support that you provide. Enough to throw money at somebody and say, hey, we've increased our numbers, welcome to Imperial. You need to ensure that they're cared for. And legally speaking, there is a big difference because positive discrimination is illegal.
Yeah.
So the scholarship is a very important and key aspect, but I think that more substantially, my department, the bioengineering department, has been very attentive to our pledges for improvement, in a sense. So this year, my department came up with the James West Scholarship, which is a scholarship for Black students, PhD students. And so we have 3 scholars every year for a period of 5 years, at which point the scholarship will be reassessed. And so over a cohort of 300 students, PhD students in my department, over the next 5 years, we can hope to see 15 more Black people. And I was on the committee that organized the scholarship, both in terms of the technicalities and the overall distribution of the scheme. And I'm almost done with my time at Imperial, but if I had to be remembered for something, I would love it to be that. I would love for it to be an understanding that I tried in my time here to make room for more people from more diverse background that can come and join Imperial and hopefully improve the representation numbers and simply make better science, because it's been scientifically proven that culturally diverse departments and groups have a better output, more creative in the ways that they solve problems. And that is not something that is limited to Black people. This is any sort of, and Black people and race, this is any sort of diversity.
Yeah.
We need intersectionality in research groups so much, because not only because it's so much nicer to work in an environment where you get to be around people from different walks of life, but also because just effectively do better science that way.
Yeah, you have multiple viewpoints as opposed to a monolithic viewpoint, and that's I think very key to breeding a success going forward. I'm just wary of the time. I don't know if anyone has any questions which they would like to ask. If you do, then please just put your hand up and I will come to you. But this idea of legacy, and there was a couple of things which you said which I thought were really key, which was the difference between positive action and positive discrimination is the support mechanisms which are put in place to assist the students when they come in. The numbers, because you mentioned about the fact that hopefully by the end you will have at least 15 Black students who've gone through the system, who are part, hopefully, of the Black doctoral network, who can have a safe space. So what is it that as individuals, as departments, as individuals, we need to be doing, do you think, to provide the necessary support for the young people who are coming in?
So in terms of support, assuming that there has been an influx of Black students into departments, and assuming that this is not the topic at hand, once they're there, the most important thing is to fix what we call the leaky pipeline, which you're of course very aware of, but for the rest of the people on the call, the leaky pipeline is this analogy of academia being a pipe through which, you know, students and people go through, going from bachelor, master's, PhD, all the way up to senior positions and eventually leadership of universities. And the pipeline is classified as leaky for Black people in academia because we lose people all along the way. Mm-hmm. We lose people to dropping out of their degrees. We lose people to choosing a career in the industry, for example, or choosing positions where they're either treated better or find better conditions of life, simply. But we do not manage to propagate the students that are an input in the early years of academia all the way to senior leadership. And I think that what we can do as departments, as people, to improve this is first understand that Black people in academia suffer from a different dimension of imposter syndrome than everybody else does. So imposter syndrome, as a phrase, is simply the feeling that you don't deserve what you have, and you know, somebody else could have been in your spot and you don't deserve your spot. When you walk into a department and there are only, well, there is one or zero other Black people around you, it's very easy to start thinking that you don't belong. So that needs to be addressed. You need to have affirmative action in terms of valuing Black students in academia, not because you have to throw, you know, praises in the air. I believe that every student should be valued more, because imposter syndrome is real for everyone. It's not something that is tied to race. And then there needs to be recognition of the work that has been done. Too many times there has been cancellation of Black authors, and it's not necessarily something that takes a massive proportion. Sometimes it's just, you know, that undergraduate or master students that did a part of the work on your thesis or on the paper that you're writing, and you don't give them co-authorship, or you don't acknowledge them. Yeah. Simple things like that. Watch out. And again, these are things that are global for everyone. I'm not encouraging you to cite only Black authors. I'm saying that we need to be careful at who we forget. We need to have this level of recognition and encouragement, because, you know, having your name on a paper, having your name on a citation on something, it just keeps you going. Yeah. And then, as on a broader scale, in terms of departments, we need to be careful. And by that, I mean that diversity on any matter must be a concern at a time of employment when a new position becomes available. This idea of the best person for the job is a meritocracy lie that I do not believe in at all. Mm-hmm. I do believe that there are very qualified people, and we should get those very qualified people. But this idea of equally qualified people, one black, one white, I can choose either, or this white person is ever so slightly more qualified or something like that. Every person is different. I don't really believe you get to a point where you get to this exact level of comparison and you choose between black or white. That just doesn't happen. That's fantasy. What you need to consider is the additional input that you get from diversifying your department. And that is something that is valuable. If you want to put it on a scale of value when you're talking about people, which you shouldn't, in my opinion, but this is how hiring process work. You need to consider that. You need to consider what you will gain from having a diverse group and a diverse team of people.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think departments should consider when hiring managers and more senior employees.
What would you say to the, because oftentimes the argument that I've heard put forward is always that, well, they're not applying. That we would, if we had two candidates that we could apply those kind of measures which you're saying, we would do that, but they're just not applying. What do we do about that? How do we tackle that?
Again, in my opinion, it's the idea of the pipeline. They're not applying because nobody has the qualifications to get to that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have those qualifications because they dropped out, because they were forgotten, because they chose another career, because of how unbearable academia was to them.
But could it also be that when we're talking about what departments need to be doing, that we have to actually say, well, I'm going to give a footballing analogy, right? I'm going to, when they want to, in the transfer window, when they're saying we need a new striker, you don't ever actually see, or very rarely do you see a striker from another team, or it does happen, where they say, well, I'm putting in my transfer request because I want to go and play for the opposition, right? It does happen. But oftentimes, the instigators of a transfer is the fact that you have an agency, i.e. the company or the football team, who go and actually actively say, right, we've seen how this player plays, or we're looking for a player who fits this bill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So instead of always saying that this is a deficit model in terms of Black students aren't applying, we can't find them, we should actively be going out and looking for them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the looking for them doesn't necessarily mean expecting to find somebody that is fully trained and prepared for the job. It might mean promoting the previous generation and giving them the opportunity so that they can one day aspire to that job. We cannot have this fast life-oriented approach to recruitment where we say, oh, we need this one person now, and it'd be great if they were Black. We want this person that fits this exact profile now. Mm-hmm. You have to, as a university, as a public service, you have to think of the years ahead. Mm-hmm. If you're not actively recruiting undergraduate students, how do you hope in 10 years to find the department manager that you need, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose it's not, as someone once said, I think it was a guy called Ibrahim, I can't remember his surname, sorry, but Kendi, he said it's not good enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist. You have to actively go out of your way or out of what your perceived privilege is to actually make sure that those who are coming in know that the system that they're coming into isn't going to discriminate them on the basis of race, color of their skin, etc. Mm-hmm. That's on the institutions. That's on us.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are immense problems in academia, broadly speaking. This is not necessarily Imperial College, but including of racism, in outright racism incidents that you hear about. And there is not much resolving of that. And I don't believe that this is a result of bad intentions or bad faith. The non-resolving part, of course, racism is always a bad intention. But it's simply because we have built this almost pyramidal structure when we rely on senior members of academia to be part of what the university represents. And if somebody acts out of place, it's very difficult to remove them from there. And so we need a much more active approach to racism. We need to tackle it where it happens, and we need to make sure that students are in environments where they will hear comments or have derogatory attitudes towards them. And this is a problem that a lot of minority communities face at Imperial and other universities in the UK. It's not just a thing of Black people, it's not just a thing of racism, it extends to sexism, homophobia, transphobia. All these things are very much ingrained in society, globally speaking. And because universities are made up of people, it will be a reflection of what our society is. Mm. And you know, these are deep issues that are very difficult to address with a snap of the fingers. And yeah. I wish I could be given an X amount of money and a magic wand and resolve everything in one go. The reality is that we have to, and I hate the phrase, but we have to heal society as a whole. Mm-hmm. And who is going to do that if us, an institution that represents knowledge and progress, doesn't take the first initiatives to do so? Yeah. So we have to be the pioneers of this new society, new world we want to live in. Yeah. And the only way to do that is to make bold choices. Mm. Make that hire in this different way. See how it goes. I'm sure you'll be glad. Yeah. Promote diversity amongst your students. And that is all ethnic minority communities, that is women, most importantly, all sorts of groups that we need representation of in academia. I don't believe we'll ever regret being too broad in who we want to be in academia.
I don't think so either.
That is just never going to be a thing. Yeah. We might very well regret having kept it too narrowly, and seeing the impact that it might have on future discoveries. Because one of the things that I often talk about is the fact that imagine how much knowledge we lose every time that we systemically exclude a community from taking part in scientific conversations.
Exactly.
What gap have we accumulated through the years by excluding women, Black people, all sorts of minority ethnics, just because we, the system is this way, they don't have the qualifications, we don't get them. What could have they done, in science? What discoveries, what progress could we have achieved if they were at the tables where we're having those conversations? And it's time we change that.
Absolutely. I've noticed that there was 2 questions, but us two just kept talking to each other. Sorry about that. Sorry. But there's 2 questions which came in. And one was asking, why is it so hard to build sensitive relationships between students with color and students with between students of color and other students? How can we tunnel this unseen barrier? So yeah, okay. So relationships between Black students of colors and white students or non-students of color. Why is it that there always seems to be, it's hard to build a relationship?
So as I understand it, this is from the perspective of a person in academia dealing with students and whether they deal with students of color or not.
I'm the perception I'm getting from this question is it's that interaction between students. There's a book, why do all the Black students sit together? Why do all the Black kids sit together in the cafeteria?
Okay.
This is kind of the route that this question's going down. Yeah.
Very simply put, if you got a choice between a group that potentially could harm you, and that's not to say that white people are there out to harm you, right? It's just to say that you have the certainty that a Black person is not going to have, or at least 99% certainty, that a Black person is not going to have a racist attitude towards you, a Black person as well. When it comes to white people, it's an open question. And I myself have huge diversity in the groups I'm involved in, both on the personal and professional level. But some people choose to stay away from that risk because of the trauma they've endured. And so addressing that is as simple as improving our environments, being unforgiving towards racist incidents, so that you know that, if you happen to be a student that makes a racist comment to another student, you will be dealt with in a way or another. That minimizes the chances, this feeling of lack of safety in an environmental, in an academic space, and eventually promotes the exchange and intercultural exchange between students. So it's one of those awful things where we say, this has become a problem because of the racists. Again, this is not a victimization or chip on the shoulder statement, but if you have had negative experience with a certain category of people, you become doubtful towards a category of people. In the same way that I'm extremely doubtful towards the police now because of the stories I've told today, I would find it very unfair for anyone to tell me that I should trust the police, because I have, and that happened to me.
Yeah.
So if the police were to improve, to use that analogy, I might regain trust, I might not, but the impunity is what makes it difficult for me to have any faith and any trust.
I think that's a brilliant answer. I also think to myself, when I look at the fact that one of the things which you said very early on in the discussion was about the fact that you embrace, you've experienced multiple communities, and you've been part, and you've almost like but you're almost like a chameleon, because actually you will absorb and you'll see the benefits of the different parts of the community. Yeah. And oftentimes, if we're in a position where we don't spend the time to actually look at what's not necessarily what's going to benefit me, but what can I learn from the different communities. If you just think that your community is the only community that's right, then we're going to always be in a position where you're not going to actually hear anybody else's view, because to you, their view doesn't matter. So I think it's that spirit of openness that we have to also try to engender as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, throughout university, if Black representation increases, interpersonal relationships and friendships happen naturally. Yeah. I don't think this is something that has to be created. I've always had friends in university, whether they were Black or white. I hate the whole color blindness thing where you don't see or something like that. But when you meet a friend, right? If that person just so happens to be Black because they are in university with you, and because university has improved its diversity quotas, and there's more of them, then fine, you've made a friend, right? And this is how it's created. And this is so personal to me because this is how I happened. My parents were in university together, one white, one Black. They met, they met. It does happen if you let it.
So this is almost an existential crisis.
Yeah. You refuse that idea, you refuse me. So
that's brilliant. I'm gonna there's just one more thing, because there is just one final question. I'm gonna try and address this one, which was that in the efforts which have been tried to actually increase the recruitment of Black students here to Imperial College, the individual has ended up feeling very frustrated because it still doesn't seem that their efforts has actually made the situation better. So how can we make it better? I might answer this question for you, if that's all right. I think one of the things that we need to recognize is, one, the staging. There isn't a one size fits all answer to this one, because it's going to be a process of dismantling years of perceptions, which years of perceptions from the students about what they are going to experience if they come to an environment like Imperial College or Oxford or Cambridge or an elite university. What is the perception? So part of the thing is about tackling hearts and minds. It's about what the university is actually going to be doing within the communities and how it's visibly seen working within the communities. I think that's where we have to really demonstrate that we mean business. If we just try to do it on and part of the question or part of the thing which I think we were alluding to earlier on is that this isn't a short-term fix. This is something which has to have a 10, 15 year outlook. We may not reap the benefit tomorrow. We may not see the benefits of the actions which we do until probably 5, 10, 15 years time. Mm-hmm. So we have to be in this for the long haul. That's what I think anyhow.
Yeah, and I definitely understand the frustration and the being disheartened by this, because it's difficult, right? Yeah. You try to do something good and it doesn't necessarily pan out the way you had expected it. And that's something I've been confronted with a lot in the last few years, sort of advocating for diversity. And yeah, I mean, it's not a fight we do for the winning, in the sense that it's a fight we carry on, hoping that people will carry it on, hoping that people will carry it on until eventually we get to a better place. Yeah. It's difficult to expect short-term results, as you put it very eloquently, and sort of benefit from the gratification that it gives you. I think you find gratification in meeting people like yourself, like me, like Wayne, like everyone that is in that fight with you, that is, you know, on that boat with you. That's where my gratification comes from, because I know that we're doing this for a good cause. Yeah. If you're fighting the good fight, you never lose.
That's right. Andrea, I always ask this one final question, and this is: what advice would you give to, I'm going to say your 17-year-old self, right? I'm not going to say whether before or after the incidents, but what advice would you give to your younger self about how they would navigate these spaces, what they can expect to achieve?
Oh, I've lost you for a minute.
All right.
Back now. Sorry. Can you ask the question again? Sorry.
Yeah. The question was, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah. Be brave. And that's in any sense of the phrase. Be brave and bold, because every opportunity that you will undertake, every open hand that you receive and you take, every single path that gets created in front of you is something that will lead you somewhere. And you have to trust that in yourself. And with that trust in yourself, always speak your mind. I've done 26 years now of never shutting up about anything. You know me, I just don't. I speak my mind, even if it's something that maybe somebody doesn't want to hear, even if it's something where I might end up being wrong eventually. Like I realized with what I had said on the call post George Floyd's murder. It created me. It made me who I am. I've learned from a lot of experience. I've absorbed a lot of cultures. I've always been proud of who I am. And, you know, looking at my 17-year-old self, I just tell him, it'll be all right, man. You'll be all right. You know, you and you got this, even if it doesn't seem like everything is always clear, everything is always easy. You're fighting the good fight.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Andrea, that's absolutely brilliant. I've absolutely loved this conversation that we've had. So open and honest and reflective. It's just been brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me and for helping me articulate my thoughts. Second language, I sometimes struggle. It's been a pleasure, and the true importance of the work that you do is paramount to me. You've been a mentor for all these years now, and yeah, thank you very much for everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to just quickly share what we're going to have for our next belonging, and it will be, we'll be having Professor Richard Reddick, and he is a senior vice provost for curriculum and enrollment and the dean of the undergrad studies at Texas University. And so the date for that will be the 2nd of September. So we're going to take a bit of a summer break, and we'll be back in September when we'll be having Professor Richard Reddick with us. And just want to say a big thanks to everybody who has supported us throughout this time. If you haven't seen some of the previous videos and conversations that we've had, then please go to our YouTube site, which is at tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, and you'll be able to see some of those. I keep putting that one, I'm going to have to take that slide out, but you can see some of the stories there. And once again, I just want to really be thankful to all of the guests who have made Belonging 100 guests and counting. And we want to just say a big thank you to everyone who's supported us throughout. I'll see you in September. Have a good summer break, and we'll be back then. Stop recording.